And we're live.
Yeah.
Dun-dun-dun-dun. Trigger warning to a podcast. Welcome, everyone.
Yes, I'm Antonia Okafor.
And I'm Nina Prevo. Thanks for tuning in to Trigger Warning 2A.
Yes, where we talk about all things guns, but mostly gun laws and current events.
And a little bit of culture here and there when we get the chance.
Yeah.
So thanks so much for tuning in today. Obviously, if you guys have been following the news, you know that we have a lot to talk about, actually, this week. So
Yeah, we do. And it's just it's not even the last week. It's like the last couple days. That's the crazy thing about it. A lot of stuff. You guys, I'm sure unless you've been living under a rock, you guys know about what's been happening with El Paso and Dayton, Ohio.
yes, unfortunately, all of us, I think, know about the shootings that took place in each respective location over the last, you're right, it's actually only been, 48 hours plus since all of this has gone down. So we can give a brief rundown on what happened with those shootings. I'm always bad with the numbers and the fatalities, but I don't know. Do you want to talk about one?
Well, I see your numbers on there, and I raise you another number. But so yeah, I've seen different ones. So actually, first saw 20, when I feel like that's the most recognized number of fatalities with the El Paso shooting, which happened a couple of days ago. But then I was looking at another one that said 22. So
so the death toll might have gone up since this article was
right. And there's a lot of people. So, and that's another thing too, is that a couple of dozen of people are actually injured and are in the hospital. And a lot of them had really serious injuries. So that's an unfortunate thing about that, is that there are 20 to 22 that are confirmed dead, and then a little bit more than 24 are injured. But here are like a little bit of the facts. A little bit of the facts right now is that they consider this, right now, investigators consider this a domestic terrorism issue. Right. So we'll get into that as well. There's a lot of that.
And the El Paso shooting specifically happened in a Walmart.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure that the shooter, in his manifesto, he was debating between using an AR-15 and an AK-47, but he used one of the two. I don't remember which one.
Looking at the pictures, it looks like it was an AK. Yeah.
Yeah.
So white male, which, right now they're making that a big issue as well. Dallas resident. They said Dallas resident at first, but then I found out he's from Allen, Texas. And I grew up in Carrollton, which is just like 20 minutes from Allen, Texas, and that is not Dallas. So, but I understand Dallas area. So Dallas area resident, which is interesting to me because you know how big Texas is. And I was actually looking at from here to El Paso. I was just like, maybe I can actually just drive there, for the day. And then I was like, no. It's the same distance from Allen, where he drove from Allen to El Paso, from here to El Paso. So it's 10 hours away. That's how big Texas is in order to do this. So yeah, absolutely crazy. And I will just tell you, just for intel, Allen, Texas does not have, it's very white. It's suburban. If anybody even knew about this, that there was a whole thing about their Allen, Texas, their football stadium, like millions of dollars, because it's like one of those towns where everyone goes to the same high school, and it's this kind of rural type of area. So not Hispanic at all.
Vibe in that regard.
Right. So anyways, 10 hours to commit this crime. So a lot of other things. One, which is really sad, finding out that the youngest patient, which they're still alive right now, the youngest patient is 4 months old.
That's just
I know.
Awful.
And that the prosecutors have already said that they're going to be seeking the death penalty. So yeah,
I did see that about the death penalty with him, and a little bit later I'll talk about because I did read his manifesto, and I've also followed up on the Dayton shooter and some of his information. So I'll talk about their motivations more. But in terms of the shooting in Ohio, kind of a different situation. That happened at, I'm not sure if it was actually at a nightclub, but it was in the nightlife part of Dayton in Ohio.
Right. It was a bar. It's like Ned something. Yeah. But yeah, it was like a.
So, I mean, I'm not familiar with Ohio, like, at all. So, I certainly wouldn't be familiar with Dayton in particular. But what I have here, or the most recent report I have here, says that there were 9 fatalities and about 26 injured in that shooting. So, as all of our listeners can expect, there has just been insane calls for gun control immediately. I mean, I think it's actually quite... What I thought was amazing was seeing on Twitter how people have gone from, oh, let's wait a little bit before we politicize this, to saying, no, let's just politicize it. It's right to politicize it. We shouldn't wait. We shouldn't grieve. We just should act. I saw that a lot. And so, and I'm sure that's why we have calls for the red flag laws and for all of this other mess. So, and I don't know if that
well, and that's the hypocrisy of that all the time, is that whenever a gun rights person starts saying something, or who's relatively not even pro-gun control, right? They're neutral. If they say anything, then it's politicizing it, right? But when, it's whenever gun control, like they actually had, did you see that the Moms Demand Action people did a whole rally, like in front of them, or march, like 100 people in front of the White House on, I think it was yesterday or the night before. And of course they can politicize it, right? It's totally fine for them to politicize it. They are doing the noble thing to politicize it. When they speak, that's when we should be talking about this
when they're standing on the graves of people who literally have just been murdered, they're the righteous ones,
right?
Of course,
right. So they've already gun control now was already trending. Of course, they can't.
It was trending almost immediately.
Yeah,
it was trending by the time I saw the story. It was already trending on Twitter. Although I don't know, maybe Twitter boosted that as a trend anyway, because sometimes they adjust what is on that list. But in any event, I think what alarmed me the most is that it wasn't just the leftists calling for gun control now, because it's like we've been talking about on this podcast for weeks and weeks, because of this mental health thing. Now the Republicans are trying to use this mental health card to push for either a red flag law or something where they're like, no, this is a mental health crisis. It's a mental health crisis. But I got to say, in reading this guy's manifesto, I mean, he obviously is murderously, like, malevolent, but he's not someone who you would necessarily just... I doubt that he was showing outward signs. And I think that we need to be really careful with the mental health thing. And that's why a lot of these Republicans are misguided in their solutions.
Yeah, well, but we'll get to that. Or unless you want me to talk about that now, I guess I could. I didn't know you want to talk about the manifesto a little bit more.
I would rather talk about that after we talk about what people are calling for in terms of solutions. And then I can talk about why it really is. The solutions they're calling for wouldn't have even prevented what what happened.
Right. So. And the whole manifesto thing, just a little bit before I move on, but I just find it interesting that now it's becoming more and more of a thing to
do a manifesto.
Yeah, exactly. Just to have something, and we always fall for it every time and then do the same thing. Including, I saw in CNN, I decided not to write it, of course, make the decision not to write it down, and we're not going to say his name or their names, both of their names. But CNN already had his name on there, so they didn't really care. Like, we're still making these people
they're
famous
still glorifying
and doing what
them.
they want. Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. So back to red flag laws. So yeah, that's the whole thing with the mental health thing, and which I will definitely say I have evolved on this issue. I definitely actually remember saying at one time, saying that mental health was the problem. And the thing is, like, a lot of times, and I'll give grace to a lot of these people, I will say that it just sounds like it, right? Because you say, well, it's not about the gun. It's not about the gun. It's the person behind the gun, right? And so you think, okay, the person behind the gun, okay, mental health. But then you forget, like, even in my situation where I have been open about the fact, because I'm a sexual assault survivor, I have dealt with mental illness and depression and anxiety, which, I mean, millions of Americans do, to be honest.
So many Americans deal with at least one of those things, right?
Yeah. And then don't even add PTSD and all this other stuff. But the thing is that just because I have those things, or other people are apt to have those things, doesn't mean that they are also apt to be violent. Right. And so that's part of the conversation that, even Republican, even as if, like, they're not already, you've had many transgressions in this area already with the gun issue, but we'll get into that. we need to stop making that it's not a gun issue, it's a mental health issue. No, this is, and I think that's where it comes down to. If you don't believe in God, if you don't, believe that there's real, actual, pure evil or pure good in this world, then you're not going to believe there's pure evil, and that people have intentions that are actually just based on evil.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
And my fiance and I were talking about this too. We really think that it's a void in meaning that is leading to all of this stuff, because and that's one of the things he talks about in his manifesto, is that he feels like he's prepared for a future that doesn't exist, and I think that obviously his what he did was insane, but this idea of like life is meaningless, why bother, is something that's felt by a lot of people. And I do think that it's fueled at least partially by some of these new atheist types who really promote this idea that it's not just the new atheist types, but it's also the postmodernist leftists who really do want to say that there's no meaning, or there's no purpose. Everything is equally as important as anything else. You can't elevate one morality above any other morality. Everyone has their own truth, and if that's all the case, then there's no one line running through all of our hearts that we can all agree on. And I also think that if we don't have a mission or a goal, like we used to look to space, even with NASA, and the Challenger, we used to have kind of a spirit together as Americans that we were working towards something, and that gave some people meaning. But now that we don't have anything like that. Our politics doesn't give people meaning. People aren't finding meaning in religion. People aren't finding meaning in their community because people are isolated by social media. So this meaning gap, leads to people being kind of malevolent and murderous. And right. I think it's a big problem. It's a problem that people don't talk about nearly enough.
Yeah. So, all right. So with red flag laws, I'll finally get into it. So unfortunately, we do have a couple of Republicans that are getting a lot of heat for what they've said in reaction to what's going on, particularly with red flag laws. Trump.
They deserve the heat.
Yeah. Trump. I feel like at this point though, I don't feel like it's a surprise when Trump says something kind of like into this fashion of saying we have to do something, of course, but then also saying something that might hint to some type of future legislation, which unfortunately it has been a history of it actually being that way, from the bump stocks to suppressors to now. I mean, it's like now he's talked about red flag laws before and about not caring about due process and stuff like that. But now it's something where even other Republicans, i.e. Congressman Dan Crenshaw right now is getting a lot of flack for posting. I'm gonna say exactly what he wrote on this part of it. He says the solutions aren't obvious. This is a Facebook post that he's getting heat for. He said the solutions aren't obvious, even if we pretend they are. But we must try. Let's start with the TAPS Act. Maybe also implement state red flag laws or gun violence restraining orders. Stop them before they can hurt someone. So, and then he puts a link to the HR 838, which is the Threat Assessment Prevention and Safety Act of 2019, sponsored by Republican, right? Good old gun-friendly Republican Representative Brian Babin of Texas. Of course, we'll talk about that too.
A Texas Republican.
I know, right? And it introduced in January of this year. So, yeah, this TAPS Act, and I'll go into it, essentially, so I looked a little bit into what it is, and what essentially it is a series of, I'll just even tell you what the summary is. It says to develop a national strategy to prevent targeted violence through behavioral threat assessment and management, and for, literally this is in the summary, and other purposes. Which is really just blanket, like, we can do whatever we want with this one.
Spewing BS at the beginning of a bill like they usually do.
Right. So the whole thing is that best practices and guidelines, like that's the whole thing of it. And it says that basically they're going to identify individuals who are exhibiting patterns of, what does it say? Concerning behavior, I'm going to say condemning, concerning behavior that indicate an interest, motive, intention, or capability of carrying out an act of violence. There alone, I mean, there's so many things that we can. That's the thing.
There's so many problems legislatively with how they phrase that.
Right. Right. It's relative. Anybody can say that you are exhibiting, identifying individuals.
What does concerning mean? Can they define concerning? That seems it's an operative word in that clause, and I don't think they'd be able to define that. And I'm sure that that's on purpose.
Right. And motive, intent, motive. Like, come on, how are you going to be able to detect someone's motive of, anyways. And the next one is investigating and gathering information from multiple sources to assess whether an individual described in subparagraph A poses a threat based on articulable facts. And then C, the subsequent management of such a threat if necessary.
I'd like to point out that what B really says, or what it's really trying to say, is that they'll use social media and other information like that as a determining factor. And or they'll use the surveillance state to facilitate determining whether or not someone has the appropriate mental health to possess a firearm. Sorry, I just want to make that clear.
No, that's actually really good.
I'm pretty sure that's what that's why that's in there.
It's not like they don't hire like some TA researcher from a university do like
yeah, I don't think it's gonna be some TA. Pretty sure it's gonna be some federal government official on the other side of a computer looking at your Twitter and your Instagram to see if there's anything that they could possibly say to take your Second Amendment away. So. Sorry, right. I shouldn't go on a rant while we're still going through the legislation.
Well, they do all this by so they set up a task force, that's part of it, and then they have a grant that allows funding up to actually $25 million from 2020 to 2024 that would be for this task force. And they talk more about like how they would implement it. Most people on that board or whatever task force wouldn't be paid, but they would have someone who would set up the whole thing and be the chairperson of it, which that person could be paid. And then they allow grants in order to do this. And then they said the eligible entity, and it was like, okay, well maybe they're talking about nonprofits or something like that. No,
I'm sure.
The definition includes one, a state, a tribal organization, an educational entity, a unit of local government, or non-governmental organization. Which, if it was just non-governmental organization, that I could do, because at the end of the day, right, that's the whole NAP principle, and the fact that the government is the only one that has actual power.
Right, they've got a monopoly on the use of force.
Right, absolutely, and that's where the problem is. So yeah, it's.
Do they so I haven't gotten a chance to actually read the bill. Do they talk about what the burden would be to have someone's guns be confiscated under this? Like, do they say that you would have to appear before a judge or anything like that? I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to read it.
So that's part of it. This bill is more of we're going to set up this organization or this task force that will have the funding for it. And these are the things that they can't do. Like, for example, it says, okay, you can't affect gun laws already in place. And then also, it also says funds limitation. Can't train any individual in the use of a firearm or encourage or discourage the otherwise legal ownership and use of firearms. So it's like everything else is fair game, but these things, right? The firearm instance there. But
so it almost is as if
whatever you want.
It's almost as if they're creating a task force to almost make a list of people who shouldn't have a firearm. It doesn't necessarily talk about how they're gonna actually take those firearms away or what due process might be involved in that. But it's more so we're creating this task force that has $25 million to go look into all of these Americans' backgrounds and find out via probably their surveillance state if they are exhibiting, quote, concerning behaviors.
Right.
So,
well, I think
or something like that.
On C, it says the subsequent management of such a threat. So then they would figure out what we're going to do with this threat, like what we would do to deal with this threat and manage this threat, which again, this is up to this essentially government funded entity to do so and implement, and of course they're going to be able to enforce it. It's a federal issue.
I hate when Congress does this, because that's just a punt to the executive branch in terms of power. They're basically like, we want to confiscate weapons from people that we think are exhibiting, quote, concerning behavior, and to implement what we're actually going to do with that list of people, we're just going to punt that to the executive branch, and then they can do whatever they want. right?
Which is dangerous. And then people were like, oh, well, Trump's not going to do that. Well, yeah, but what if Kamala Harris gets in?
I know. And actually, maybe we should maybe we should talk about that right now so we can have a comparison between the two sides. Because right now, it's not just Dan Crenshaw. Even didn't Trump come out and say... Maybe we should talk about that first.
Lindsey Graham has been pushing the same thing.
And Trump said he would just add the whole kind of red flag law situation to the immigration bill that he has, and as sort of like you scratch my back on immigration, I'll scratch your back on gun control. So it's actually a lot of Republicans that are pushing this mental health issue, and I think it's a problem. And then Kamala Harris, I mean, of course the left is insane, so we know she was going to say something ridiculous, but I actually want to read, I'm actually going to just read her quote real quick because I think it's better than summing it up. I'm actually prepared to take executive action to put in place rules that improve the situation. I also have, as a part of my background and experience working on this issue when I was an Attorney General of California, and we put resources into allowing law enforcement to actually knock on the doors of people who were on 2 lists. A list where they had been found by a court to be a danger to themselves or others, or on a list where they were precluded or prohibited from owning a gun because of a conviction that prohibited that ownership. So, the second option is actually something where there's judicial mechanisms where people who are, there's a restraining order for a criminal conviction for them to not own a weapon. There's actually mechanisms where a court can enforce that and try to get the weapons from you. But this other thing where being found by a court to be a danger to themselves or others, that's actually very similar to the whole red flag law language. It's this whole idea that if we decide you're dangerous, we decide. If the court decides, then we get to take your firearms away. So, and she's ready to have people knocking on doors. She, there's no gray area in that.
That's the thing. She loves government. Like
she
like,
loves it.
I don't even think, like, if you want any type of liberty, right? Like, even on the left, I mean, I'm sure that there are people who are like, oh, get the government out of my, my marriage and stuff like that. Like, how do you not, like, also then, apply that to the fact that this person doesn't want you to have, I mean, it's just complete government takeover and control. Maybe I'm naive in the fact that there are people who really do want that. I mean, who are okay with somebody else implementing things like that. Not that the fact that if they have the power, it always seems a pretty good idea.
Right.
But be on the other end of it, that's the part where you don't like it anymore. So. And
you would think that Kamala Harris, with all of her, like, oh, I'm so, like, hood, I'm, like, from the street. It's like, don't you know that we need firearms to defend ourselves in the black community?
Well, she's okay with it because she has her own guard.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm sure she has armed security.
Oh, and she said it.
And I'm sure that she put plenty of, and we know she put plenty of non-violent blacks in prison for years and years. She did that plenty. So she's not really concerned about the black community. She's not living in the black community that many African Americans are living in on a day-to-day basis. So she doesn't actually understand how important it is to have firearms to defend yourself. As minorities in this country.
Ooh, we have that's a lot of.
Oh yeah. Ooh yeah. Edgar, maybe we should pitch it to you for questions over here.
There's been more comments than questions.
Oh, okay.
One that kind of stands out to me anyways is if you completely, this is from Bobby Chambers, if you completely disenfranchise young men and tell them they are a cancer on society, some people who are on the fridge are going to respond to that with violence.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other, somebody's wondering if this is about the TAPS Act.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
We did talk a little about
that. Whole discussion about Dan Crenshaw was about the TAPS Act.
It's also just very quickly important to note that we are now on I think it's about 15-second delay. So a lot of what you guys are talking about right now is actually in the past now. So some of these questions are maybe coming a little bit late.
Well, that's all right. Even if they're late, we can jump back in what we had been talking about. But yeah, I mean, I think that comment is very important to think about because we have, and we've talked about third wave feminism and some of the problems with it, but we have a wave of feminism that essentially vilifies men and masculinity and all of that. We do have a problem with with universities charging, a fortune to go to get a degree, and then there being not that many actually lucrative jobs for people who have a bachelor's degree or something like that. And we also do have immigration problems in this country that a lot of people who are in the working class foresee that some of their high-paying jobs are going away. A lot of, and I'm not necessarily agreeing with any of these points, but I do think that there's a lot of different factors in culture right now that are putting pressure, especially on like young white men who probably are disenfranchised to a certain extent. Not necessarily in terms of the actual opportunities they're getting. Like, I'm not talking about a structural situation where there's laws in place that are against them. But in terms of culturally dealing with people on Twitter, dealing with other people on college campuses, it's... And unless you're willing to be one of these allies who's bowing to the whole ideology, you're not going to be treated with that much respect as like a straight white guy in our culture, or at least your opinion isn't valued that much anymore. Yeah. And maybe some people will disagree with me about that, but I certainly see it. And man, when I went to law school, it was just rampant. It was just the idea that straight white men are to blame for all of our society's ills is a very popular opinion.
Yeah. But I think, again, also bringing it back to, again, that it could be that they have the best life set up for them too. At the end of the day, there are those who are just doing it because they have evil like intentions.
Yes.
They want to hurt people. You mean, think about all the people. I think about when people like education and stuff like that. That's not always the issue. I mean, you think about the Nazis who were like PhDs, right? They knew better. They had a life that was set up well for them. Yeah. But at the end of the day, they wanted to, obliterate a whole race, a whole group of people. So that's just evil. And so I think there's definitely part of that. And yes, we definitely need to address those issues of those who are feeling disenfranchised and are feeling, they're not part of a society. But again, there are so many people who feel that way and don't have violent reactions to it.
But that's why I was talking about the gap of meaning, because and this is something that I can start talking about some of what the El Paso shooter said in his manifesto, but it's something that Jordan Peterson talked about a lot in his lecture on Cain and Abel, and it's this whole idea of if you start to get to that place where you're so envious of other people, or you feel like you've worked really hard but you got cheated out of what you deserved, then because that's really what Cain, that's what motivated Cain. It was jealousy of Abel, and it was the fact that he had prepared a sacrifice for God that was not accepted, and because of that he became murderous. And I think that it's important to think about the fact that there's a lot of people, you're right, there's so many people who are just as disenfranchised, but can find a path to meaning in their life where they're not going to become malevolent and evil and murderous and envious and all of this other mess. But when people are just out in this void where it's like life is meaningless, when we die, that's just it. We don't have anything that transcends life on earth. And a lot of people have this mentality like the story of history is almost run out or something. Like we're almost at the end.
You're describing me, by the way.
Oh, that's what we carry here every time.
And we love you, Edgar. But I do, fair enough. Like there's a lot of people who can even have that mentality and still find a reason to keep going. But I think that for some people, the combination of the disenfranchisement plus the life has no specific purpose thing can not that it justifies it, but I think that that's the path to evil, actually, is to be in that combination of isolation and like bitter nihilism. Because if life is, I don't know. I'll let you talk about what, I don't know. I've been ranting for a while.
Oh, no. I want to hear more about the manifesto.
Yeah. And I just want to point out, a lot of people have been talking about how this guy is like right wing, and he certainly has some views that I think would be associated with right wing, but this El Paso shooter, he's politically nuanced, and I think it's important that we understand why these shooters did what they did so that we can try to help prevent people from doing it in the future. Instead of just passing reactive laws regarding inanimate objects and stuff, maybe we should actually figure out what they were thinking and try to figure out why our society got them to that place. So the first thing to note is he was a fan of the New Zealand shooter, the Christchurch shooter. He says that first. He's got beef with both parties, which he lists out in kind of a decent amount of detail. But his biggest grievances, obviously, and I think this is why people are trying to claim that he is a right-winger, he's got big problems with immigration. He refers to the immigration situation as an invasion of the United States. He also thinks that corporations own our government, which is kind of true to a certain extent. But, he's got big beef with corporations. That's why he doesn't like Republicans. He thinks that they facilitate corporations being in control of our government. He's got big problems with environmentalism. He thinks that there's effectively no hope to save the world for future generations because Americans have shown no signs of changing their behaviors regarding plastics or other recyclables and things like that. He's got a big beef with environmentalism. It's one of the things he talks about the most. He also goes on a rant about race mixing, which I think is really strange. He basically refers to people like me as impure blood or something. I have some stuff. I highlighted some quotes, but I don't want to actually quote him at all. But in effect, he calls for a separate state for each race, which is pretty crazy to me. Like, how many races are we counting there? Are we going to split up whites into different categories? And what and blacks too, for that matter? Like, are Haitian blacks and African blacks different? Also,
right. Skin colors.
And it's like, I'm mixed about like 45%, 55% between black and white. It's like, what is there a state just for mixed people, or is it going to be a state just for Creoles and then a state just for like if you're mixed with Asian? I mean, the whole thing is just absurd.
Yeah.
And he really, this is something we were joking about before we started, but he actually goes on this whole thing about how if the Native Americans had taken the Europeans more seriously when they arrived, that was an invasion, that they could have actually protected their land from the European invaders, and we shouldn't make the same mistake that the Native Americans did.
This guy's just like all over the place.
I know, he's all over the place. But he truly, and the thing that was really strange to me is at the end, he talks about how he really is a patriot. He thinks he's a patriot. He thinks that he is fighting to save America from invasion. He thinks that he's fighting to save us from ourselves in terms of environmentalism. And he thinks that he is giving the middle finger to both the Democrats and the Republicans for getting us into this mess with the corporations practically like owning our government. So, does that sound like a Trump supporter to you?
No, it sounds. Well, that's the thing. The media just wants so desperately, and just the hypocrisy with this of how much they're gonna talk about this forever. But think about the shooting that we had in Colorado. But because they were two people, transgender, and someone who was, I think, was a Bernie fan or a Bernie supporter, actually hated Trump.
Yeah.
We talked about it for like. It was hardly even in the national news, to be honest. I just remember talking about it, and people were like, oh, my goodness, I didn't even know about that. Like, yeah, like there was a shooting in Colorado, but it didn't fit the narrative that they wanted.
So
they
then it
wanted
disappears.
Someone like this. Exactly. This is what they want, and this is why they're talking about domestic terrorism and white nationalism and white supremacy, and why this is an issue now. And it was actually, I think I just saw a CNN. It was like guns and hatred. Like that's the big problem here. Like it's not mental health or mental illness. Like this is the narrative that they want. And speaking of, I didn't even know about this guy beforehand, the astrophysicist.
Neil deGrasse Tyson?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, he said some insane stuff before, but he had some cojones to tweet out those statistics about how many people die from random other stuff within 48 hours on a regular basis. I don't know if you want to talk more about it.
I mean, that was I don't know. I mean, you should just go look that part up. I don't think we should read everything to you guys. We gotta empower
do
our
some
audience
research,
to do
guys.
Research. But yeah, it's pretty. People are talking about it right now. Actually, I saw it because it was trending, and because they're mad that he literally was just spouting out facts that didn't fit his narrative, and
people were
upset
ticked off on Twitter. People were saying horrible things to him in the comments.
Right. And just the fact that there are other means that the media does not cover, that have killed plenty of other people, and it's just not sexy enough as an issue. Like he said, spectacle, right? And that we don't cover it. And it's true. I mean, even if we wish he had added abortions in there, that's another 3,000 a day that, that really changed people. So,
but even within the gun violence thing, I don't know if you saw, but in Chicago over the last 48 hours, they ended up they had to start turning people away from emergency rooms because there were so many people that had gunshot wounds from gang violence. And that just didn't even get covered. More people died in Chicago than in either of these shootings, but they weren't talking about that.
Right.
And the other thing that I think is interesting about the Dayton shooter is I'm pretty sure that that'll go out of the news cycle pretty quickly as well, because when they started going into the Dayton shooter's social media, here's some things that we found there. He was I always tease about this, but his Twitter had his preferred pronouns in his handle, so that's always a good sign of some ideology on that front. But he promoted Antifa and the DSA on his social media often. He agreed with the bartender, with AOC, I guess, that the centers on the border are concentration camps, just like Nazi Germany. He called the Antifa terrorists who shot up the ICE facility a martyr. He praised Satan on Twitter, which I think is kind of crazy. He said that he would happily vote for Elizabeth Warren. And one of his quotes was that he wanted socialism and he didn't want to, quote, wait for the idiots to finally come around to understanding it. So, we actually don't know his motive. He didn't write a manifesto or anything.
Yeah. He did kill his sister, though, who was in the part of the nightclub. So that's what they're trying to figure out, if there's a connection there.
And wasn't that they're not even, or at least last time I checked, they weren't sure if that happened before or after. There was some timeline. There was a timeline thing where they weren't sure when she died in relation to everyone else. But I just think that it's important. Neither of these individuals who committed these like horrific acts of terrorism are anything like the narrative that the media has been trying to paint. Neither of them, actually. And even this guy, I mean, we still don't know his motivations because he didn't say anything. But neither of these guys are out saying, I'm pro-Trump and because I've got like racist intentions, I'm gonna go out and like show the world my thing. I don't know, just the idea that
well yes, not pro-Trump, but I will say for the guy from El Paso, it is clear that race is part of that.
But he specifically said that he was targeting the Hispanics not because of he actually talks about how it's not because of their race, but because they're the ones who are invading.
But they're not the only ones, though.
I'm not saying that he's right. I'm just saying that he wasn't saying, these Hispanics are like the culture that Hispanics have, or Hispanics in and of themselves are a problem. He's talking about they're taking away jobs, they're accelerating the problems of automation. So while I actually do think this guy is a racist, I just don't think I don't think that he did that shooting because he's a racist. Does that make sense? Yeah. I do think he is one, though. Just to be clear. Right. The whole a separate state for each race is like pretty plain. The whole race mixing is just, he said that it muddied up the gene pool and caused problems for genetic diversity.
Right.
Nonsense.
Well, yeah. So, but like you said, Dayton is not going to be talked about very much, and it hasn't. Yeah. And it will be El Paso. Oh, another thing is all the congressmen and the people running for office right now. Of course, Beto, like after, I just knew he was going to use that for his, I mean, he's talked about banning AR-15 before.
He came out with that. Or he was on a couple different news stations talking about
expletive, like out of like crazy. Like he tries to, again, another guy who just tries to act cool, like for no reason. And then just this is gonna be something he's gonna use as a center of his campaign. If he doesn't, then I mean he's not pulling very well. But
I know he'll probably drop out relatively soon. I hope.
Right. So.
But I guess my last thought on this is just that if we have murderous, malevolent people like this who are in this place where they've gotten to the point where they're just I don't know, either for the sake of fostering further division in this country, or because they are racist, or because they are socialists who are, trying to bring about their revolution or whatever. This is all the more reason for us to not give up our right to bear arms. Because we sane individuals who are just going about our daily lives need to be able to protect ourselves from people like this. And if Kamala Harris, or even if Dan Crenshaw, if they get this kind of red flag law passed on a federal level, I actually don't think that people like this will end up without weapons. I think that it's people like me who might have some anxiety or some depression that they deal with, who will be told that they're not allowed to defend themselves, while like murderous, malevolent criminals will still go get a gun and just do whatever they want to do. So anyway, to me, all of this stuff happening is just a sign that we're totally on the right side of history trying to defend our right to bear arms, because people got to be able to protect themselves from individuals who would do us harm like this.
After the whole thing happened, I was just like, how do you not think, and someone actually said the same thing, he was like, I don't get how people see what's happening and then think automatically reaction is we should make sure all the guns are taken away. Really, the mentality, is that the difference between us and them, like thus. I mean, the fact that we had the mentality, like I had the mentality, and I was just like, man, that is why I need to make sure that I carry consistently. Like, that's the first thing that I had in my head. Not, man, I'm going to make sure. Like, that's the thing, is like, when you have the mentality of you cannot control, and you cannot control what other people do.
No.
Right?
And that's one like, even my closest friends and family, if I tried to convince them to do something, it's not like I'm even successful with that. So there's no way we're going to control people
so
like
you
this.
only have, the only power you really have is what you do with yourself. And so you get to make that decision. You get to I'm not saying that if you had a gun in that situation that you are 100% we're going to, end up alive after that. I mean, we don't know what would happen. I don't know. Like, all I can say is like, oh, all this stuff about, protect yourself. And in that situation, at least you have that means. Well, you don't know what's going to happen until it happens, right? But the fact that the matter is that have that option. If you don't have any type of means or tool, then you're not going to even have the opportunity to see if you're dead or alive after that. You're more than likely 99% of it, like, I don't have a statistic, but you're going to, you're not going to, prevail in that situation. So, yeah. Right.
Yeah. I mean, the whole issue with I mean, I tweeted about this earlier. It's like and what I said was, I don't call for banning inanimate objects after violent crimes occur, because I understand the definitions of the words inanimate and crime. Because the word inanimate means, right, that the gun can't act on its own. There has to be a human acting for it to do something, right? It's an inanimate object. And crime implies that what they're doing was already illegal. So the murdering people is illegal. The act that these individuals did were illegal. These were illegal acts that they committed, and they used an inanimate object to do it. And it's just absurd to me that in that instance, what we're going to do with all of the facts around us, we're going to look at the inanimate object. That's what we're going to ban. And if nothing else, like the UK should just be an example of this. Right. They keep banning crap, and there's still violence. There's still violence all the time. I mean, they're at the place where they have to round the tips of some of their knives. They can't have a pocket knife or they can't have a knife on them longer than 3 inches walking down the street. And there's still stabbings in the UK all the time.
Was it you who was telling me that, like, they have these places where you can put your knives in now, and that someone actually, like, they found out that someone actually stole one of those boxes where they
I don't think I was the one who told you about that, but that's really funny.
Yeah, I think I was talking to someone, and they were saying the same thing. They were just like, basically that they have these laws now, and they have these places where you're supposed to put your knives and everything, and of course no one's gonna try and steal those. Like, they're stealing those things because that's where the knives are.
Yeah,
like, it's so, like, come on.
Of course
we're not
they
even
did.
Thinking
of course
common sense here.
It's just like the TSA, how they'll steal anything from you, man. If you have something good on you going through the TSA, they'll take it if they can think of a reason why it should be classified as contraband. Sorry, I won't get on that whole thing.
Do we have any more questions?
Yeah, I am curious about that because we've said
comments,
a lot about a lot of controversial things.
Yeah, and we had a technical difficulty for a little bit, so I apologize for that. But anyways,
Okay.
comment from Me Too on Tube. Name one politician that gives a damn about anyone but themselves. I'm not even going to try and pretend to pronounce this one, so I'm just going to leave that shit alone. Oh, no cussing on your podcast. Huh?
Oh yeah, we're gonna.
Were we trying to be a no cussing podcast?
Oh, I don't know, because I cuss a lot.
We've let our
red
guests
flag
swear.
has detected,
Okay.
you know.
All
Yeah.
right. Trump said video games are to blame.
I saw
Oh,
that,
that's
yeah.
right.
How do we explain to the government that laws don't affect criminals? It affects us. And then
The government knows that it only affects us. That's what they want. Sorry.
you're
That's
good.
that's the point, though. They know that it's not going to prevent these crimes, but they want to control the American people.
And why don't you ever see mass shootings by young black men? That shows it's a heart issue and not a firearm issue.
Okay. I will say Dallas. You don't remember Dallas? That was definitely a young black man who committed that shooting. It was police officers, but.
The Black
Dallas
Lives
shooting.
Matter shooting guy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, I'm not one to like push this, especially to verify myself. But I don't know if you saw the whole picture of all the people who have committed mass shootings. Mass shootings means 3 or more people, 3 more fatalities, right?
Right.
And it was basically all over the spectrum when it comes to race. So, but
because wasn't the Virginia Tech guy? He was like Asian, wasn't
Right.
he? And then
yeah.
And then the guy who did the gay nightclub in Florida, I don't think was that a white guy?
No, he was. I think he was.
I don't know. Maybe someone in the live chat can tell us if I don't know. I feel like people always want to highlight the white guys that do it, right? But I think that they're at minimum a lot of these guys have been mixed,
Right.
So, but I do think that it might not be a race thing, but I do think that they're, especially young men, they're really, the way that, like I was talking about with the education system and the way that feminists talk about young men, like it really is, the entire education system is sculpted to essentially cater to like a female learning environment. And the more they get rid of recess and stuff, all of that is hurting boys who are in like elementary schools and stuff. So there's been an active push for a long time to make sure that women and girls are taken care of. And I understand. I mean, women and girls, we have had a rough time for like a long time. Like we got our right to vote so late, and I understand why there's been like a push for so much feminism, but it has gotten to a place, I think, where we're starting to do it to the detriment of men. And it really shouldn't be about that. It should, because men and women both have our different issues, and our society should really care about both genders and both of our problems. And because men do suffer. They're not just privileged patriarchs walking around with no problems in this world. Men have real problems that they have to deal with, and people just want to act like it's so easy for them. Anyway, I don't know if you agree with me on that.
This is a patriarchy apologist.
Patriarchy apologist.
I can't even like stand you.
So the question, the question was rephrased.
Oh.
So
Okay.
let me rephrase that statement. If it was a gun problem, I would think the mass shooters would be a variety of races versus young white males.
If it was a gun problem.
So he's trying to say that it's
I don't know
not
if
a
it's
gun
he or
problem,
she. I don't know.
or this individual.
I'm so sorry.
Assuming genders, but they're trying to say that it's dumb to blame the guns because of the demographics, right? What do you think about that?
Okay.
I mean, I think it's dumb to blame the guns for other reasons, but
it's dumb to blame the guns because of the demographics.
Yeah, like I think what this person is trying to say is because, I mean, or at least I would have to look at the actual statistics because I don't know, but because a lot of these mass shootings are committed by young white men, we can't just point to the gun because there might be something going on with young white men in this country that might be the problem. I think that's what he's trying. Not that I agree with it, but I think that that's what he's trying to say. He says yes, or they say yes. Sorry, I've assumed your gender a lot. I just have a feeling that a lot of our viewers are. I don't know if I called him white or whatever.
Actually, I just got close to it and it says fajita. It's just spelled Faheeta.
Oh.
I'm gonna read it as fajita, but.
But I don't know about that. I mean, I don't think it's a race issue that we have these mass shootings. I stand by the more cultural, bigger issues that we have. Well, we also have a culture that doesn't value life at all. You know?
Well, I mean, again, it's what is covered, right? And when what's covered is what they want. It's not the Dayton, Ohio person, really. It's going to be the El Paso people. Really, Dayton, Ohio just fit their narrative because it's the last 24 hours. So it's like, oh my goodness,
yeah,
what's
it was
going
more
on
recent.
Trump?
But they're
So
going to go
about
back and focus only on the El Paso person now, just because of
the town
the
hall,
fact that there was anything racist in his manifesto.
CNN's going to have a town hall, which already said, I think, August 7th. So they're going to talk about, I know, another town hall. I'm sure they're going to be yelling at someone. Well, the thing is that I don't even think Dana is no longer the spokesperson, right? So it wouldn't be an NRA thing. So it wouldn't be like Dana and then like everybody yelling at her. It would be, I don't even know, because they don't have a central organization to yell at anymore.
Also, how absurd is it? I mean, like, I have mixed feelings about the NRA in general, but how absurd is it to blame these particular shootings on them? I mean...
Right.
These are not NRA people.
Well, I mean, they blame it
it's
time.
Like anything that's a gun.
Parkland wasn't either, and they did that for sure. So
yeah. I mean, yeah, that's true.
They're gonna use that. It's gonna be a political thing. So,
but I just think that we've got it. It's the same thing with the Democrats who are proposing reparations and stuff. Like, we have this mentality now where people think that they can blame other individuals for the acts of things that certain people did, right? It's like, well, we can blame the NRA for what these individuals do. We can blame you for what your ancestors did. We can, there's all of this, even though you didn't do anything in particular, we can blame you by association. And I think guilt by association has become very widespread. It's popular.
Yeah.
So at least for the authoritarians.
So I don't want to end this podcast episode with just talking about how like horrible Republicans are when it comes to the red flag laws, and because I feel like a lot of people do that. They'll just talk about, well, you shouldn't be doing that, and then they don't offer solutions. The big thing I'm going to stand on is, again, if it was a non-governmental side of this, right? If it was just the entities that they defined were just like nonprofit organizations and non-governmental organizations, that would be different than all the other ones. Because why? The difference is that the other ones can implement force, and non-government organizations cannot. Matters. Right, and that's what we, as conservatives, as Republicans. And I've already believed now that the Republican Party is not the conservative party. It's just not. So let's just take that out of the equation. But to be a conservative, that should always be your solution. It seems like a lot of this seems like from a mentality, a mindset, whereas the core issue is that you believe that government is the answer.
Right.
And so if you believe that, or even having like an inkling that government is the answer, and if you're part of the government, then, and with which the representatives are, then they think they're part of the answer, and that therefore they should act, right? Everyone should act on that means. But that's the problem with this, is that as a conservative, you should be trying to empower those who are not government entities in order to solve problems and to actually bring solutions. Have a task force or funding, and then you're still, if you have any funding to that, then you're still kind of implementing it, through that means. But you should be empowering the non-governmental organizations and nonprofits, the community organizations, to make decisions to help individuals who actually need help, so we as a community, as families and et cetera, are able to solve this problem.
Right. And I think that our most recent guest is a perfect example of what conservatives should actually be promoting. Instead of promoting more government programs, I mean, I complain about conservatives conserving progressivism at this point, because that's kind of what a lot of them do. Conservatives in quotes, not real conservatives. Real conservatives would be trying to conserve the Constitution and liberty, right? But a lot of conservatives these days, or neoconservatives, are really just preserving or conserving the progressivism that the progressives were able to get through in the last 100 years. So, so that's part of that's part of the issue. It's like, what are you actually conserving? But an entity like holdmyguns.org that's actually trying to help families be able to take care of their loved ones who might be going through the kind of mental health issues that people like Dan Crenshaw are concerned about, that's really more of a conservative solution. I mean, I'm a libertarian, but that's really more of a conservative solution than calling for bigger government. And every time conservatives have a reaction to something like this with bigger government, it's like, how conservative really are you? Because you certainly are fine just going to the government for your solutions, and the government can't really do anything. I mean, look at the DMV.
Oh my goodness. Oh yeah, you said that too. I saw your tweet on that.
Yeah, I will never understand why people want to keep giving more power to the entities that are in charge of places like the DMV. Like, come on.
And again, like, so Congressman Dan Crenshaw is getting a lot of flack right now because he was like he's a poster child, right? Everyone loves him. And
yeah, he got a lot of attention.
And yeah, exactly.
His
so
whole
that's why
eye patch thing. He's
that's
all cool
why
or whatever.
People are even like more upset with him. But again, please remember, like, no, that this did not just start with him. Like when Lindsey Graham and other Republicans pushing this. I mean, I forgot the representative in Pennsylvania who's trying to implement it in his own state. Like, this is something that's already been going on for a long time, state by state, and but also on a federal issue. So please stop looking at the letter behind someone's name and thinking that they're all good and that they're principled. You need to be keeping people accountable, and you need to also, and I'm glad I'm seeing people voicing their opinion on this and saying, I'm upset with you for implementing this, and I hope it does change his mind and other people who are pushing this. Again, he didn't even write this. He didn't sponsor this bill,
there's no way Dan Crenshaw wrote that bill.
Right, it's Brian Babin from Texas and a Republican from Texas, okay? So that person is really the one that, so there's other people, unfortunately, Republicans who are pushing this, and we need to make sure that we are, making sure that they get back to the point of liberty and focused on that, and gently bringing them back to what really matters.
Because authoritarianism knows no party, right? You gotta vote based on actual individuals and based on, what they've actually done. People don't look at the voting records of the people that they're about to elect, but that's important. Before you just vote blindly on your next ballot for a congressperson, I beg you, look at how they voted on just a couple of bills that might be on some issues that you care about, because most of them are incumbents anyway. So, and if they voted badly on bills like this, then don't elect them again. Vote them out. Anyway, that's my actual solution, is vote out almost everyone in Congress because they're awful. So, anyway, with that, I don't know is there any other questions? I don't want to ignore our audience.
No other questions. Statement, I suppose. This isn't a government issue, I hate to say it, but this is something that communities themselves have to band together and protect each other. The government can't solve our problem, which is I think you already mentioned it with Holder.
Don't hate to say that. That's so true. Don't hate to say that.
Yeah, you don't have to hate to say that.
Yeah, it's
the government
absolutely what we believe.
Oh, and that was Brian Schilling.
Oh, thanks, Brian.
Yeah,
the government couldn't protect us even if it wanted to. So, especially not with legislation like this TAPS legislation. That's not going to do anything to protect anyone.
Right. All right. Well, that was... Wait, do you have anything else?
No, I think we've probably been streaming for a long time, too, so we're probably good.
We can talk about it right now. It's like, another episode of Red Flag Laws, because it keeps... We don't want to talk about it, guys. I promise you. But it keeps coming up.
We would have really liked to not have to have this podcast be about shootings and Red Flag Laws, but, man, I mean, the media on this has just been absurd, so we have to have a counter voice to what's going on.
Yeah, and we have to also keep our own accountable. The fact that it's just, yes, obviously we are more on the conservative, Republican, or libertarian side. But we are going to, if we want to be honest, we have to keep them honest, and we have to make sure that those leaders in our party and our, who say that they have our principles and our values, that you keep them, on the straight and narrow. Otherwise, you don't want other people thinking, because the thing is, the problem with this I get so upset about is that the fact that people on the left will use this as, the Republican did this. The Republican said this is okay. Or a conservative said that, and they're really popular in your party. Well, no, that's not actually the values that we actually have. And so it's important that when you see that, you do call that out, because then the other side will use that against us.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and the other side, they're all happy to be hypocrites and not call out their own, but we should be better. So
right,
and we will, and that's why we'll win. Because I do like to end on a positive note too, because I do think we'll win on this issue. I don't think Americans are gonna just let this stuff go.
Right.
So.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight or today or whatever it is. And we actually we just live. So I'm going to say, whenever you listen to this, my name is Antonia Okafor.
And I'm Nina Prevost. Thanks so much for tuning in tonight.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.